Continuing on in my quest to play every Sonic game, next up is Sonic Unleashed because Anthony suggested it. Once again, I'm not going into this completely blind. I've played a couple stages and generally know the story of this one. I'm playing on Xenia because I don't have a way to capture my 360, with a bunch of modifications and patches on the emulator, not the game, just to make it play better. But if something seems weird, especially technically, I'll make sure it's not just the emulator making it that way. The game opens up with a 10 full minutes of cutscene, where Sonic fights Eggman, pulls out the Chaos Emeralds, becomes Super Sonic, instantly destroys an entire spaceship, then Eggman destroys the Earth because Sonic was monologuing, draining the Chaos Emeralds in the process. So basically the plot of Sonic Adventure 2, but Eggman wins this time. Instead of obliterating the whole planet though, it just splits apart, releasing Dark Gaia, a god or something, from the core of the planet. This transforms Sonic into the Werehog, but as we see in literally the next cutscene, the sun negates Dark Gaia's effects. So you're telling me Sonic wasn't in view of the sun in space? I find that hard to believe, but whatever. Could have just delayed the Werehog reveal until they landed, but it's fine. Also, Sonic survives a fall from orbit landing face first. I know Sonic is immune to fall damage, but this is ridiculous. He lands next to a little red guy he later calls Chip because he likes chocolate chips. I already know that Chip is Light Gaia, but that's pretty much all I know of the story from here on out. I don't even know what that means. The first stage is the tutorial level for the game. It functions as such well enough. It teaches boosting, homing attacks, the general feel of the game, combat gates, the speed sections with lane switching, all that. It's less than a minute, but I think that's a good thing. If you already know how to play the game, you can get in and out of the tutorial without thinking about it. The camera's a little weird, and as far as I can tell there's no camera control at all during most of the daytime stages, but I got through worse in Sonic Adventure 2. Speaking of, going from adventure gameplay to boost gameplay is weird. I'm not used to using the boost at all. You're immediately introduced to the leveling system, which is never explained at all beyond experience exists, but it's pretty self-explanatory, despite supposedly not knowing the Werehog segments are beat-em-ups yet. There's immediately a cutscene where Chip is super into this ice cream, and so is the vendor. The ice cream is bigger than Chip himself. I don't know how he got it down between the end of the cutscene and the start of the gameplay segment, but I digress. You're supposed to be given incentive to talk to people and get Chip's memories back somehow, but there's no reason to talk to anyone, so I'm not going to. The first proper daytime stage is pretty good. Initially, I disliked a lot of what Modern Sonic does with its stage layouts, with Sonic being too fast to react to upcoming obstacles if you're actually going fast, with the point of the game being replaying levels to get better scores and ranks. But after playing Frontiers and Colors shortly after, I started to warm up to it. The stage is longer, at about 3 minutes for my first playthrough, which I think is a good length for Sonic stages in general. There are plenty of rails, jumps, and metals that you just can't react to and have to know are coming, but again, that's kind of the point. At least none of the non-reactable stuff kills you. It's good in my books because it encourages replaying without significantly hindering a first playthrough. The cutscene afterward highlights that Dark Gaia's effects take full force at night. The sky gets dark real quick after sunset, literally no twilight at all, but I think that can be chalked up to an actual dark god roaming around. Dark Gaia makes people sad and turns Sonic into the Werehog, presumably because Chaos Emeralds? That's why no one else is affected in the same way, right? Because no one else has a super form? Is Shadow a Werehog during this game too? Either way, the Werehog has stretchy arms, and now it's time to play the first nighttime stage. Finally, the first Werehog stage. I love it when my Sonic game turns into a beat-em-up. It's exactly what I was looking for to contrast with the high-speed platforming action stages. Jokes aside, this isn't that bad of a beat-em-up by any stretch, at least not to someone who hasn't played many. At the beginning of the stage, before moving at all, Chip says something about Tails going off in a direction, but the cutscene shows Tails right where he ends up. They weren't following Tails, this statement makes no sense. Anyway, using combos is actually way better than just mashing the attack button. You do more damage and get through the encounters quicker, which means less opportunity to take damage and all that. My biggest problem with the combat is its half quick-time events. Once you damage an enemy enough, you'll be given an indication that you can use a critical attack on it by pressing the B button. Once you do, you'll be given a QTE, and the harder the enemy, the longer and more complex it'll be. A critical instantly kills the enemy, gives you more points than a standard kill, and fills your Unleashed meter more. The Unleashed meter allows you to do far more damage for a short time once it's full, and it seems like you're invincible while it's active as well. It's mostly filled by collecting Dark Gaia, not the character, which you find by breaking interactables in the stages and defeating enemies. Aside from the combat, the Werehog stages are very focused on exploration, in the same way that the LEGO games are focused on the exploration. You defeat a group of enemies, then run in a circle around an area, breaking everything that looks breakable. Sometimes it'll just give you Dark Gaia, sometimes you'll get an art book or sound test song, and sometimes you'll get a medal. The medals are used to unlock stages as you go through the game, so you do need them unfortunately. I know the medals are pretty disliked by most people, given that one of the most popular mods for the game is to remove the requirements outright, but they do heavily encourage exploration in both types of stages, far more than the red rings in my opinion, so I don't hate them. Next up is a 5-minute auto-scroller that's just one giant QTE. I'm pretty bad at these, so this segment is awful. It's super easy for most of the level, but as soon as you reach the boss it gets way harder out of nowhere, and if you die at all you restart the entire level from the very beginning. A simple checkpoint would make this stage much better right off the bat. Like I said, the stage is around 5 minutes long, meaning if you die on the boss, you have to sit through 4 whole minutes of sitting on the tornado pressing easy to react to buttons that don't prepare you for the fight whatsoever. This is awful. Tails is once again the worst part of the game despite him being one of my favorite characters. Such a tragedy. On top of the terrible gameplay, the tornado lore here makes no sense. The mech in Sonic Adventure 2 was the Tornado 3, dubbed the Cyclone, but the tornado in this game has Tornado 3 written on the side of that. Despite that, Tails calls it the Tornado 1, not to be confused with the first tornado model that gets destroyed almost immediately in Sonic Adventure 1. It looks like the first tornado, but also has the ability to transform like the Tornado 2, but it almost certainly doesn't have landing gear in the combat form like the Tornado 2, which is very noted by Tails in Adventure 1, and was ostensibly fixed with the Cyclone being that it had actual feet in combat form. Saying tornado is really hard. This is truly the greatest problem with Sonic Unleashed, and I don't know if I can look at the game in the same light anymore. After that travesty, we end up in Spagonia. Our goal here is to find Professor Pickle. When we get to the school he teaches at, we learn he was kidnapped by Eggman. Instead of just saying that though, the character gestures out that the man who kidnapped him had a big belly and a mustache. I guess this is supposed to be funny? The humor in this game so far has been inoffensive, if not actually funny, but that was just strange. Chip goes on about how he'd die if he didn't eat, then actually dies, but Tails reassures him that Eggman is feeding the professor. Another joke that doesn't really land but isn't offensive. That was convenient timing, thanks game. Also, if Chip died here, does that mean he's immortal? Once again, we're tasked around running the city talking to people, this time to find the professor instead of finding someone who knows Chip. You actually have to talk to people this time, people being a little girl for some reason who knows that the professor was taken to Missouri, a village based on African stereotypes. The whole game is based on stereotypes, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. All the characters you can talk to have flags next to their name that are based on real flags, showing what country they're supposed to be from. They're fun caricatures, it's fine. There's an actual overworld exploration section before the next level here, which is new for this game at this point. Just kind of platform around to get some extra goodies, art, sounds, medals, the usual. There's a whole actual elephant just outside the bounds of the level, which is weird, but I'll go with it. For some reason, the platforming section that leads up to the level has the camera zoom out while taking control away for a moment. Don't know why that happened, but otherwise I like this little area. It's a nice little respite if you want it, and if you don't, you can just go straight into the stage. The next stage is a werehog stage. I guess I went from day to night on our way to Missouri from Spagonia. The level is long, it took me about 20 minutes, but I did get an S rank. This level introduces a couple, admittedly basic, puzzles. You have to throw an enemy at a switch or push a crate onto a platform before raising it up, for instance. There's also quite a bit of werehog platforming here, which is nice. It's not all beating up weird Dark Gaia creations. There are also weird plant things that shoot projectiles at you that you have to beat up. I guess those are Dark Gaia creations too? I have no idea. There aren't any doors to break open in this level, at least not that I found, so finding enough stuff to get me an S rank was pretty easy. The level ends with 4 robots that keep respawning, but there's no trick or gimmick here. You just have to beat them up enough for them to stop spawning. It's really annoying, especially since half of them have shields. After defeating all the robots, the gold ring appears, and suddenly we're in Eggman's prison, I guess? Professor Pickle starts talking about sandwich ratios or whatever. It's a great callback to Tails saying Eggman would feed the professor, but the joke still doesn't really land. They get the pickle out of the cage, and he says to get whatever is in the vault before they leave. Sonic straight up shatters the vault with a single punch, and Tails runs in and grabs a scroll. This scroll is the Gaia manuscripts, and explains that there are altars for the Chaos Emeralds that will restore their power and, in turn, repair the Earth. We're placed back in Spagonia since we brought the pickle back to the college, but it's still nighttime. This introduces some discrepancy in the amount of time it takes to travel around this world, but I don't really care enough to make a point of it. The next stage is finally another daytime stage. First though, we have a cutscene showing that Eggman is looking for the Gaia temples, resorting to making the villagers tell him where it is. This makes sense, he probably read that scroll immediately, but thinking about that, it's weird that he left it in a vault and didn't just take it with him. He did think Sonic died by falling from actual orbit though, so I guess it makes sense. Even Eggman doesn't think Sonic should have survived that. The thing I said about non-reactable obstacles not killing you was unintentional foreshadowing. There's a ramp in the stage that kills you if you aren't boosting across it. I'm not entirely sure how to get to the top of the path after this ramp, but I guess that's what replaying is for. That said, there are also those cannon things that shoot Sonic in a direction based off which button you press, but this time without a button on them. You're just supposed to know that you can press either button to go either up or forward, depending on which button you press, letting you choose whichever is right for the situation. Luckily, the first one doesn't kill you if you don't press a button, just slows you down. It's an alright obstacle. The poles you swing on barely work. I spent longer than I should have trying to get the metal on top of the first set of bars and I still couldn't do it. I was expecting less strength in Sonic Adventure 2, but this is giving that a run for its money. The 3D sections where you're just trying to run quickly forward are lined by mud on the sides of the track, which is a good evolution of the use of this kind of section or stage, since it just slows you down and you have to learn to control Sonic while going that fast. The stage is immediately followed by an Eggman boss fight called the Egg Beetle. It's alright, you just have to chase and homing attack him a few times, nothing special. The worst part is the medals in the boss fight. My depth perception was really weird in this fight, so it looked like I should have collected them a couple times when I just didn't. The 2D section is more annoying than anything, you're just kinda waiting for it to be over while dodging missiles and spiky balls. It was here that I noticed that rings don't go down all at once like in other games too. Instead, you only lose a chunk of rings that you have the chance to pick up, instead of all at once. I thought that was new to Sonic Frontiers, I had no idea this game did the exact same thing. Once you defeat him, you're treated to a cutscene where Sonic places a Chaos Emerald in a conveniently shaped hole on a pedestal, only to discover that this was a Gaia temple. This cutscene makes me wonder a few things. First of all, does it matter which emerald he placed here? Does the color come from the energy itself and the emeralds are just containers for the different colors of energy? Or does the energy come from if it literally repairs the planet? It couldn't have been in the planet itself, right? I guess it's just Gaia magic? Sure, we'll go with that. It's probably why all the water isn't falling into the core too, that's fine by me. Aside from that though, does this mean that Sonic and Chip were flying blind not knowing where the temples were, since they realized that this was a temple after Sonic had already placed the emerald? How did they, including Eggman, know it was in Missouri? I guess it was on the scroll and they just got lucky in finding it? That's as good an explanation as any. The next stage I played, as the game doesn't do a very good job of telling you where to go, was a daytime stage in Alaska. A village based on the Inuit people of, presumably, Alaska. There were igloos and parkas, all that. Just before the level you get the stomping shoes, which, big surprise, let you stomp. You stomp a switch, and then in the stage stomp an ice platform, and that's about it. The stage starts off with Sonic obliterating a ton of igloos and snowmen. Hopefully no one is around there. Should be fine though, probably. The stage is full of ice, which thematically makes sense, but is also very annoying to platform on. It's pretty difficult to die on the speed sections, as they're more bobsleigh shaped, but it's difficult to keep your speed. This level doesn't really have anything you can't react to that will kill you, so that's a positive over last stage, but it does seem way more difficult, particularly with the second sleigh section, as a super thin path with the robots is borderline unfair. If a robot happens to attack you as you run into it, you can just go flying off the edge with no potential recourse. The 2D sections are pretty average though, despite the ramp with the ring that I couldn't figure out how to get in. Hopefully this stage remains a gimmick and nothing more. This one didn't stand out as good in my mind. It also doesn't lead to much, as Tails immediately says to go back to the pickle afterward, since there was nowhere else to go in the area. The next stage I completed was the Werehog stage in Apatos. Patos. It was fine, I guess. I've been pleasantly surprised with how fresh they've managed to keep the Werehog gameplay despite how repetitive it is on the 10. Between the increasing platforming difficulty, the new combos as you level up the combat stat, and even new objects put into each stage, it's staying fresh enough that I'm not tired of the Werehog gameplay yet, as much as I prefer the daytime stages. This stage introduces explosive boxes that deal a lot of damage, a new robot variant that has orange lights instead of blue, and a new Dark Gaia enemy thing that's really big and pukes up little tiny guys. There are also a lot of breakable doors in this stage, and as far as I could tell, none of them were actually required, meaning the exploration aspect is being kept alive pretty heavily. For some reason, despite this, there are parts of the stage that permanently lock behind you, so if you're trying to explore and accidentally go the wrong way, that's too bad, can't go back. The gates seem random too, so it's not like it's obvious where you'll be cut off at. I guess it's fine in a game with ranks, as in the daytime stages where you can't see obstacles coming, but it's still annoying. It was this stage, however, that I learned your score resets completely upon death. That means if you make it to the final fight at the end of the stage, and you die, you have to replay the entirety of the 15 to 20 minute stage if you want the S rank. This includes destroying every single object that had something that gave you score, killing all the enemies again in a way that gives you the most points, and running through the entirety of the stage. That's absurd, and I'm very glad I'm not going for S ranks in this playthrough. This stage also has a very long vertical platforming section of a clock tower. I love the theming of it, and the difficulty is balanced well for this stage in the game, but knowing that the score resets, it feels cool. The stage ends with a short fight against a few orange robots and the big enemy introduced in the stage, the goal ring being replaced with a key. I don't think this is the first key in the game, I recall getting one earlier, but this is the first clearly telegraphed key that you have to collect. Why it's in the middle of the city is beyond me, but I digress. Immediately after the stage, you walk out into the street and a bunch of people are uncontrollably dancing. Chip uses a camera that I think he got from Tails to unpossess them. You then have to fight a few Gaia goons, nothing too special. The cutscene afterward is what I want to highlight. The Werehog Spider-Man's out of here so Amy doesn't see him like that. Why can't we play as the Werehog like that? Imagine zipping through the city or jungle bashing baddies along the way with Sonic's stretchy arms. That would have been so much more fun, but instead we got a generic beat-em-up. Despite his best efforts, Amy now knows that it's Sonic, and she runs off with the professor begging him to tell her everything he knows about Sonic's new Werehog form. You can talk to her right after though, and she says she doesn't care, so that really goes nowhere. You do get to use the camera whenever you want from here on out though to unpossess people. You only get 2 charges and have to return to Tails every time you want to recharge it, which seems a bit superfluous, but I can't imagine the camera will be integral to the game by any means, so it doesn't really matter. I don't actually have enough medals to get into the why are so many areas in this game so impossible to pronounce? I don't actually have enough medals to get into the nighttime Chunnan stage. I did, however, leave enough in the first daytime stage, so I went back there and slowly made my way through getting all the medals that I could find. I was still one short, but revisiting the stage and going through so slowly highlighted how much of the stage you were really able to explore. It's surprising how much you can explore, but because of how much you can actually explore, it seems like you can't explore very much. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the only way I know how to describe it. From here on out, whenever I have to go back and collect more medals, I probably won't do more than mention it, since I imagine it will be happening pretty frequently. The actual stage is weird. There are walls that are literally just piles of rocks that you can break through. They don't stand out from the surrounding environment at all. I guess it kind of furthers the exploration concept with the breakable walls, but not in a good way. You just can't tell that it's breakable, you have to guess that you can break it because it looks a little different from the rest of the terrain. The combat also gets a lot harder from here, at least this is where I noticed it. There's a platforming section where you have to jump on a tiny box for metal, but as you jump onto the box, a cutscene plays that shows the landscape, then slowly pans back down to the box. What's the point of this? It just wastes time. It made me notice how many cutscenes there are in this game mode. Almost every time you start and finish a combat arena, most times you enter a new area, every time you pull a lever, it sucks. There are these pull obstacles that you have to button mash to use, and my fingers are near incapable of mashing as fast as you need to. I'm comfortable chalking this one up to the emulator, as each pull seems to vary in difficulty, to the point where I needed to use the old ballpoint pen trick for a few of them, so it could be reliant on framerate. Regardless, this obstacle, as well as everything else that takes button mashing, is really annoying. There's one of the poles that you swing on and jump off of, same as the normal ones, but it occasionally retracts into the wall with essentially no indicator beforehand. There's also one immediately after that just falls off of the wall. This would be fine if it wasn't introduced over a death pit with the camera at a weird angle, so you have to completely readjust so you don't just go flying into the lake and die. After this act, we're finally fighting our first Werehog boss. This one is a phoenix, but it's purple fire because Dark Gaia or something. The fight itself is pretty simple, you just throw pots of water at it until the fire is doused, then attack it until you get its health low enough to do a QTE, denoted by a vertical line in its health bar. The only problem is if you attack it too much before going into the QTE, you get launched away and have to damage it again. After the first phase, you have to douse it multiple times to attack it, but it's still not difficult by any means. Its projectiles can stop the jar of water you throw, but it does stop moving after a little bit and you can just throw the jar then. I haven't really understood the thing with Chip giving everyone chocolate, but the giant phoenix taking a tiny bar of chocolate is pretty funny, I'll give it that. The cutscene afterward gives a canon reason that Eggman doesn't kill Sonic. He likes a little challenge with his schemes, and I can't blame him, I'm playing this game after all. Next up is the, from what I've seen, most liked stage in the game, Rooftop Run. It's alright, I guess. I think it is my favorite daytime stage so far. There are a lot of obstacles you can't see coming, but instead of killing you, they just put you on a slower path. The theme is fun, running through a city, jumping across rooftops, even climbing a clock tower. It's too bad Aptos, still don't know how to pronounce that, did most of that first. The music is nice, but it doesn't come close to something like Aquarium Park or even Pumpkin Hill. The stage doesn't prevent you from completely stopping and going back to get medals quite as often as some other stages. The sides of some of the speed sections have death pits, but they're preceded by rails, so as long as you don't jump off, you won't fly to your death. There are some precision, for lack of a better term, platforming segments and obstacles that are introduced really well, like the barrels, which are safe until the third or fourth one, which is red and covered in spikes, as well as the wall jump pads, which use QTEs, something the rest of the game has been doing already quite a bit. This is one use of QTEs that I've actually liked so far, I think. Replaying the stage seems pretty fun, especially once you get the Lightspeed Dash, which I can only assume we'll get eventually because of all the lines of rings. There are a couple too many of the sidestep sections where you just hold boost and dodge lasers. They aren't engaging or difficult, but they aren't too long, aside from the last one, but even then it's only like a minute. Speaking of, the rails here are designed very poorly, at least if you're trying to go fast. If you're too fast, the lasers that the robots fire to the sides can still hit you in the middle if you get to the turn too quickly. After another turn, there's a gap in the center rail, and you have to be on one of the sides, which is already encouraged by there being rings, but if you happen to be on the right already, which is the side the rings are on, there are more rings on the left, encouraging you to jump over there, but if you try, you die because of the gap in the center. On top of that, the stage is a little too long in my opinion. 3 minutes is optimal for a level like this, but this one took me about 6.5. Replaying it would probably bring that down quite a bit. Aside from those last couple nitpicks though, this stage is alright. Dragon Road is the first level I've actually wanted to replay to do better and immediately. I didn't, since I want to actually finish this review soonish, and I'm already almost 5,000 words in, and I don't think I'm even halfway through the game, but I digress. The platforming sections with the spinning platforms is a big part of that, I think, since it's on cycles, and my marble-it-up addled brain really wants to get on the optimal cycles. The alternate routes are also very clearly in the background, and it's pretty obvious that they're the faster ones. Even rewatching the level to write this part, I'm seeing alternate, faster routes that I want to try. The theme and spectacle of this level is really good too. The fireworks, breaking through structures, this is how spectacle is done. Take notes to the escape. The sidestep section at the end is also very reliant on actual skill and reactions, which is new for these. And it was fun learning what I was supposed to do. The icons showing when a bomb was going to show up were really nice, and I'm pretty sure this is the first time, if not one of the first, that they'll show up when you're running towards the screen. I'm pretty sure they broke for me, since it showed them even when a bomb wasn't ahead of me. I did awful, but I didn't come close to dying. That said, I did die inside due to my performance. The Egg Devil Ray was the first boss you aren't immediately taken to at the end of the stage, since it's in Spagonia, and finding it was unnecessarily complicated compared to every other level so far, but that's honestly probably on me. The boss itself is pretty simple, basically the same as the Missouri fight, just a little harder. Dashing forward in the sidestepping section, attack, 2D section, attack, nothing special, it's just fine. Afterward, we place another emerald, and that's another continent back in place. I ended up being a moon medal short for the next Alaska level, so I went back to Apatos to get some more from the hub. In doing so, I learned that there are optional acts scattered around, one night and one day. The night one was pretty bad, just a bunch of doors you have to button mash to open, a couple fights, and placing color stones in the right spot. The day one focused entirely on rail grinding, something I liked in Sonic Adventure 2, but unfortunately it didn't work quite as well here. A couple sections of the level were in 2D, but they were also curved. One of the curves had a gap, so I jumped the gap, but because it curved, I'd missed the landing. It took me a few tries on the jumps to successfully finish the level. Aside from the jank though, there's nothing special here, which means back to Alaska. This stage is where I figured out what I dislike about the Werehog, aside from the constant battle music. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad, but it's the only battle music, you know? The stage themes can be pretty good sometimes. Anyway, the Hedgehog is good for horizontal movement and the Werehog is good for vertical movement. Their movesets focus almost entirely on their perspective movement. The only problem is the Werehog stages don't focus on the movement much at all. It does some, obviously, like the clock tower or various platforming puzzles, but largely there's very little vertical movement for the Werehog. The game even exemplifies that distinction in this stage, over halfway through the game where it expects you to use a running jump to cross a gap for the first time. Also in this stage I ended up clipping through some geometry on complete accident. Funnily enough, not for the first time, but I did get stuck here. I was able to get out with another glitch, thankfully, so I didn't have to replay all 10 minutes of the stage up to this point, but it's still frustrating that it can happen at all, especially since I didn't do anything weird when it happened. There's a platforming and sliding section, followed by another combat section, and the stage is over. Immediately after that, by walking into the stage rather than just a cutscene like before, is the boss Dark Morning. It's by far the easiest and simplest boss so far. You just freeze the things on the side of the platform to get rid of the barrier, freeze the boss itself, attack the green point, and repeat 3 times. The one on top of its head is a little trickier, but you just have to get close to it and be able to slam attack before freezing it. We restore another chunk of the earth and go back to Spagonia to talk to the Pickle. He tells us to go to Shamar. Afterward, another cutscene plays that gives us way more lore than I was expecting from this game to have in the first place. Turns out the Gaia Goons are actually pieces of Dark Gaia itself. I was probably told this before and just wasn't paying attention, but I know now. Eggman is attempting to gather all of them to reform Dark Gaia, because that went so well last time he tried to use a god for his plans. The daytime stage for Shamar is largely fine. You get the lightspeed dash just before, which really makes Sonic's moveset feel complete, but to get it, you have to do an air dash over a gap. This would be fine if you did a homing attack whenever you try to air dash if you're not still over the platform you're jumping from. You have to jump from really far back in order to not hit the hourglass. The first time you can use the lightspeed dash for anything in the stage is for a daylight medal, but it always either sends you way too far or not nearly far enough, so the medal is stupidly difficult to get. In the speed sections, there are pedestrians just standing in the middle of the road that completely stop you dead, which is really annoying, but I guess they work as an obstacle? The worst part of the stage though is near the end. There's a cliff next to a scripted turn, which always work great. If you jump at the wrong time, you can just go flying into the abyss with no way to stop it. While attempting to find the next stage, I stumbled into another act for Shamar. It relied very heavily on QTEs during platforming, which would have been fine if it worked. I tried to pass one obstacle 3 times, nailed the QTE every time, and I just never made it to the other side. Anyway, I guess you're supposed to go to Empire City for the next stage? The gimmick here is electricity, but they didn't do anything interesting with it. You just go destroy a box and continue, or flick a lever like everything else. This level also focuses a lot on balance beams, which are slow, annoying, and entirely horizontal. At this point I was a little lost. I went back to both Shamar and Empire City, but I couldn't access the other stage in either area. It turns out you have to talk to the Pickle, and that will unlock the areas for you. It's ridiculous that the game expects you to stop whatever you're doing and go talk to the professor every time, even if you already know what to do. To unlock new areas, sure, but open new stages in areas you've already been? Why? I went to Empire City Day stage first, and it was uneventful. The ground was green, but I'm pretty sure that's just a Xenia thing. It was most similar to an adventure stage out of any of the stages so far, and I don't know what it says about me that it's my favorite daytime stage. There's a lot of rail grinding, button pressing, and traps you can't avoid if you're going too fast. Also, why can you be hit by spikes on a rail you've already jumped off of? I know it feels like I'm just rushing through this part of the game, but there's really not much new to say since we've already gone through so much. Before entering the Atabat Night stage, you have to move a box so that you can platform up to the actual level entrance, but the level itself doesn't use that mechanic at all. Instead, it blends into all the others. The two things I noted while playing the stage was that enemies seemed way stronger out of nowhere, and the medals are very poorly hidden. Most of them are just barely off the main path, put in a bush or in the air or something. All the enemies in this stage are reused from somewhere else, all the obstacles are reused, there's nothing new here. Even moving boxes came back from the first level to get a sun medal. There's not even a memorable platforming section. I guess it does have a section where you press 4 switches in order denoted by the flower stages on it, but it's not interesting or difficult by any means. Next up is the Shamar Night stage. The main gimmick of this stage is the fire wizards. They are, believe it or not, on fire, so you have to throw a barrel of water at them to put them out for long enough to kill them. On paper, that's the main gimmick, at least. Much more prevalent in the stage, in my opinion, is the bees. The red bees. They attack quickly, do a ton of damage, are impossible to hit, and are all over the place. If you haven't stunned them and try to hit them, they just fly up and become completely invincible. You have to grab them, which you can only do with specific enemies if they aren't already stunned, this being one of them, throw them, then attack them while they're still on the ground. Meanwhile, they're zipping around the entire arena because their one attack rockets them forward. After the stage, it's a Dark Guardian boss. This boss is unique, I'll give it that. You have to push 3 boxes to the opposite side of the stage, while the boss and 2 minions it'll occasionally summon try to push the boxes in the opposite direction. Each time you get a box over, the boss takes a good chunk of damage. There are quick time events every now and then to keep you on your toes, and fences that pop up and fall down just add tedium. That's another chunk of the earth in place at any rate. To enter the Atabat Day stage, you have to talk to the Pickle, who tells you your new powers will let you in. Not only did I get any new powers at all, canonically Sonic doesn't gain any power. I have no idea what he's talking about. This was also the first time I had to go back and collect daytime medals, and it was only like 5 of them. Every other time has been night medals. The stage itself is actually pretty good. There are a couple lethal obstacles that you can't see coming, but outside of that it's fun. I ended up passing a lot of obstacles without even trying, but I also did die a few times, so it balances out in terms of subjective difficulty. It has an instance of the classic springs bouncing you back and forth until you jump at the right time, and it finally introduces stakes to the speed sections, where you can actually die if you don't turn properly. The second sidestep section doesn't quite work right. Everything was misaligned, but it was still fine. The game also started really chugging near the end of the stage, and this game's reputation leads me to believe that it wasn't entirely the emulator's fault. The Egg Lancer fight is fine. The only difference between this and the other daytime fights is a QTE at the end of every lap for a big chunk of damage and some unavoidable attacks. At least unavoidable as far as I could tell. For some reason, Xenia really didn't like this area. Graphical glitches happened in the next cutscene even, which made it look like Chip was afraid of the graphical glitches and Sonic couldn't see them. Chip gets his memories back after placing the emerald, but cliffhangers until after the loading screen. He then slowly tells us that he's like Gaia and summarizes the rest of the plot. For some reason, the werehog has Sonic's normal voice in this cutscene. I got really sentimental during this cutscene for some reason. I really couldn't tell you why. I have no actual attachment to Chip. I think the estrogen in the music got to me. It occurs to me in post that joke could sound like that I'm calling anyone who plays Sonic Unleashed a sissy or something. I take estrogen, I'm a trans woman. The next tornado stage is bad, just like the last one, and I don't want to think about it anymore, so I won't be elaborating. Eggman Land is easily the worst stage in the game. It brings everything else the game had and worse. It's stupidly long, it's the hardest stage so far, obstacles that only waste time, obstacles you can't see coming, unfair enemy combinations, everything. It's awful. There are conveyor belts that slow you down while you're on them, on which I would randomly just get turned around with no possible recourse. There are extremely long QTEs, which simply aren't fun. There are pipes you have to balance on. I've already voiced my grievances with those, but on top of that there are pipes you have to jump onto the short way, which would be a cool concept if it had been introduced in an easier state. Luckily there's a way around it, but those are such a huge jump in difficulty, it's ridiculous. You switch between Sonic and the werehog throughout the stage, which is a cool idea, but it's never used for anything interesting. It's just more of what the game has already given you. A fast platforming section, then a slow section, then a fast section, then a slow section. That's it. No cool puzzles where you have to move a platform as the werehog, then go through as normal Sonic or anything. Honestly though, if those were the only issues with the level, I wouldn't really care. I would beat it and move on, never thinking about it again. Calling it mediocre. Instead, I had to suffer through this part of the stage where robots would just keep attacking and attacking and attacking. Again, it would be fine, but it can also spawn 3 of the orange robots that shoot you, and they can stagger their attacks in a way that's impossible to get out of, and you just die, and have to do the entire arena again. It's awful. Oh wait, just kidding, you're actually supposed to break a wall and flip a lever while enemies are attacking you. Good luck, this is the first time you're ever expected to do this. Speaking of firsts, it's directly followed by the first time you're ever expected to actually fight the floating enemies that are usually just platforms, and then another section where the poles can just retract into the wall while you're on them, with no indication beforehand. Triple whammy. Being forced to flip a lever while enemies are attacking you happens again, but it's not as bad the second time, since you know to rush to the lever. But there are 3 doors, so good luck I guess. The final fight of the stage is 2 of the big guys with a shockwave attack, which is just straight up unfair. You can't even move the camera, so while you're fighting the wizards, they can just stagger their shockwaves and be extremely annoying. Anyway, you place the final Chaos Emerald, bam, you win, the game's over. Unfortunately, there are a few more boss fights before we're done. The tornado gets shot down, he's completely fine later, I don't know what this amounts to. Then we cut back to Sonic. Turns out we didn't actually seal Dark Gaia, Eggman managed to harness it into a mech. Sonic gets eviscerated, at least we should have. That beam directly hit him and melted the floor, but didn't do anything to Sonic. The floor falls, and the entire fight takes place on a falling platform. This means that the hole is really, really deep, which makes sense, we're falling to the literal center of the Earth. But also that platform is falling really slowly, since the gravity for this fight is exactly the same as normal. The Egg Dragoon, or Ultra Hyper Prototype 1 as Eggman called it, is a fine fight. You just dodge some stuff, hit the green, kill some goons, QTE, repeat. During the QTE, Eggman hits himself with a drill that he shot out to hit Sonic while Sonic was on him. Real smart, but the kicker is he does it both times. I thought this guy was supposed to have 300 IQ. The falling sections are weird, the shots are weird to dodge, but it's fine. The Dark Gaia fight, on the other hand, is awful. Eggman gets blown up, Dark Gaia gets released, wallops Eggman, and Sonic seemingly wants to give up, which is way out of character. They're really nailing these final cutscenes. Chip summons the power of Deus Ex Machina, the Chaos Emeralds to use the temples as armor, and becomes the Gaia Colossus. You dash forward for a full minute, dodging rocks and attempting to take as little damage as possible from an undodgeable laser before having a QuickTime event, then a short platforming section of Sonic. These all require trial and error, as going off ramps at the wrong point will kill you with no way to see it coming. You're timed, so hitting too many obstacles will also kill you, regardless of ring count. I'm honestly completely fine with trial and error, but not when there are limited lives. That just makes it annoying and unfun. This is an incredible concept for this fight, but it's ruined by the actual execution of it. Repeat it 3 times, the fight's over. On to Perfect Dark Gaia. The spectacle in all 3 of these fights is great, by the way. It's cool, but that's all that really has going for it. You play as Super Sonic during the Perfect Dark Gaia fight, as you should, and you even get to control him doing the thing where he zips through an enemy over and over until it dies. Unfortunately, controls is a strong word. You more suggest where he should go. Every time you die, you zip through a ton of rings and are guaranteed to get an extra life, so that's a boon at least. After taking out a few of the snake things, its shield goes down and you dash into it for the final blow. I'm interjecting here in post because I completely forgot to write in the script about the QuickTime event after you finish the boss fight. I guess it's just that unmemorable. It's fine, it's just a normal little QuickTime event, which would be fine, but then you have to press the X button 60 times? That's way too much, are you serious? Anyway. The Pickle gives some pseudo-philosophical speech about how light and dark are in balance or something, completely against the theme of the game, but I don't really care. Sonic is almost dead for some reason, but Chip, using the last of the power in the mech, throws him out of the earth, and he lands, fittingly, right back in Apotos, where he landed right in the beginning of the game. That fall definitely killed him this time, but he's fine, so I guess Sonic really is immune to fall damage. Feels good to finally be done with this game, not because I enjoyed it, but because I've been wanting to be done with it for so long. I don't think I would have finished it if it wasn't for this video. I think that speaks volumes to the game's quality. It's so drawn out, vastly overstays its welcome, and even when I wasn't tired of it, it was mediocre at best. This game is so much worse than Adventure 2 only because it's so much more boring. The Werehog stages were fun for a lot longer than I expected, only because they introduced new platforming gimmicks. As soon as they stopped coming, I was bored of the gameplay. All the combat is samey, even if the combos freshen it up a little bit. Even the Sonic gameplay was boring, especially before the power-ups, but even then the stages were too long, I was too focused on finding medals, and the stages weren't fun enough to go through because of the unfair obstacles. I feel like it's only fair to give this game a rating like I did for Adventure 2, and I think it deserves nothing more than a 5 out of 10. I will never be playing this again, but I was capable of finishing it and didn't hate the entire thing. At least Endless Possibility is a banger. One day I'll play the PS2 version, but today is not that day. And now I'm going to give some unscripted final thoughts because I don't think that closing paragraph really encompassed all of my thoughts on this game. I did genuinely enjoy it at first, especially the first 2 daytime stages, and even the first couple Werehog stages. It kept it fresh for long enough that it was enjoyable. I think if they lobbed off everything from like Shamar and forward, or even just made the Werehog stages like half the length, and then also did the same thing with the Daylight stages, this would be a much better game. And then took the final stage, split it into its own sections for day and night, and made them, not insanely long and the most difficult thing in the game by far. Making it the most difficult thing in the game is fine, it makes sense, it's the final stage, but it's such a huge jump in difficulty, it's ridiculous. Anyway, I think I'm probably going to do Sonic Heroes next, because I got a comment about it, and I have been wanting to play Sonic Heroes anyway. After that, I do want to do some of the classic games, but I don't know if I'm going to jump straight into them. Sonic Heroes is going to take a while because I'm in the process of moving, and I'm really trying to get this out before I move. And I need suggestions on what the best way to play the classic games is anyway. Right now, I'm thinking of the Genesis collection on Steam because I was able to buy that before it was taken down because of Origins. If there's a better way that you think I should play it, please leave a comment. I am clueless there. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love you all, and I don't know how to end this.